Good morning, I'm the Flying Farmer, and today we're going to do a short tutorial video on showing some basic tips of soldering and how to do some basic electrical connections that we might encounter in working on our trucks. So today, let's look at our equipment. Right now I've got a 80-watt pistol grip soldering iron, a wet sponge, and some tip cleaner and tinner. So I'm going to wipe the soldering iron. It's already fully heated up to temperature. I'm going to just dip it in the cleaner and tinner. Now I've got a nice shiny tip, something that's going to give me good contact. You don't have to have cleaner tinner, but I do because I do quite a bit of soldering. I've got some 60-40 tin and lead rosin core solder. You can use lead free if you want. So another way to tin the tip is to just touch some of the solder to it. So to begin with, I recommend using a nice quality pair of automatic wire strippers. You will appreciate it in the long run. So to begin with, we're going to just strip some wire off the ends of, I've got some 16 gauge wire that we're going to solder today. And then you want to just twist them up. It'll make it nice and easy and clean in order to solder to get a good final outcome. A helping hand, I use the jigs up because I solder bullet connectors for my RC hobby, but you can use any kind of soldering jig or you can just use your hands, but I have found it to be very useful. So we're going to take our soldering iron, wipe the tip, touch a little bit of fresh solder to the end, then we're going to touch it to the bottom of the wire and just apply the solder to the top. And as you can see, there is now solder on the wire, and the side I applied the solder, there's plenty of solder on, but if we flip it over, there you can still see copper shining through. Now the reason you want a good tinned wire is that in order for the solder to properly flow, it needs to be completely inside of each of these wires. So we're going to just again clean it, tip it, just touch it to it, and now you've got a nice properly tinned wire that has solder completely through all of it. Do the same for the other side. Okay, now I have 2 scrap wires, but if you were to be soldering on a long wire run, don't forget to slip your heat shrink over the wire before you solder them together. Otherwise you'll have to desolder it and do it again, which has happened to me many times. Okay, so using the jig, I'm just going to position the wires to where they are touching and they have pressure against each other. Let me try to get this closer. Okay. Now I'm gonna, again, wipe my soldering iron, get a nice tin, because that'll allow the tip to, the molten solder on the tip will wrap around, and it gives more surface area to warm the wires quickly. So now I'm going to just touch it to the bottom, and then you will see the wires begin to get molten, and then you can just add a little bit more and then pull away. And as you can see, in a few seconds, there it just turned dull. It goes from shiny and it flashes to a duller color. And so now I have a properly soldered wire. A good way to test your electrical connection is to give a tug on it. If it doesn't come apart, you've got a nice mechanical and electrical connection. So then we're going to slip the heat shrink up halfway on both sides. Take a nice, I've just used a mini butane torch because I do a lot of soldering, a lighter works too. And then just quickly wave it over it. Always keep it moving because it's high heat. You don't want to burn the heat shrink. So now you have a nice, solid electrical and mechanical connection. Next up, you may encounter something that maybe you want to make a grounding post. So we're going to do that next. I'm going to use some larger diameter wire because that's what I have laying around. Again, we're going to strip the wire. And we're going to twist it up. Now this is for a mechanical crimping connection, but it's very useful and it just shows the way I do it. I love a good quality crimping tool because it makes life so much easier in the long run. Now, even though this is a yellow, I go ahead and use the blue slot because I like a tighter connection. I want to feel safer with it. And this is a ratcheting crimper, so it will stay until you have fully locked onto it. And now you have a solid mechanical and electrical connection. Another way to do this, if you want, sorry about that. Alright, so another way is to strip your wires, twist them together, slide on your spade connector. This here's a male, but as in your case you will need a female in order to slide over switch, and then you can just use any pair of pliers or a pair of crimping pliers to then crimp your wires. So we're going to slide it so that it's facing up and then just squeeze down. Now one thing I like to do is I like to use as you can see on these pliers, there is one that has a nice hook in it. Kind of beads down and presses them together, and I like to put it in there after I've crimped it and just give it a good squeeze to push the two halves of metal where it's the way the crimper's made into it, and it makes it nice and solid mechanical. Now if this was a female connector, we could then slide it directly onto your relay or your switch or anything else for that matter. Alright, now sometimes you may have an alligator clip that's bigger than the wires. And one way you can solve this problem is by crimping and soldering. I've done this with when I had some 2-gauge wire and 0-gauge battery terminals for an air compressor, onboard air compressor setup I was doing. So again, you'd want to crimp them on. Now if you just have regular pliers, you can crimp, just squeeze down flat. So you've got a nice tight connection, and that in fact would be good enough, but if you want to learn how to solder it the proper way, okay, so now I'm going to show how we can crimp and solder on a connector. I've used this method for whenever I was using 0-gauge lugs onto a battery terminal, and I was using a 2-gauge wire, so I didn't have a giant crimper in order to crimp the lugs on. So here's what you can do, only on a much smaller scale. Alright, first you're going to want to pre-tin the wire again. Okay. So you're going to wipe your soldering iron. Then you're going to tin the soldering iron, tin the tip, and then we're going to tin the wire. Turn the wire upside down. You can see there's an area that the copper is showing through. So again, we want to re-tin it. Touch it to it. And there we go. So that's nice and tinned. Take that out. Now we're going to tin our mechanical connector as well. I'm left-handed, so it may be opposite for the rest of you folks. Now I'm just touching the wire to the inside just to get some coating. That way it gives a mating surface for the wire to bond to. So now that that's tinned, you can see you don't want it to run all the way down inside of the alligator clip or whatever you're using. And that may be kind of hot. Okay, so now I'm going to stick the tin wire into the tin connector, and I'm going to just crimp it down with a pair of pliers, if this is all you have. Alright, and now we are going to reflow the solder internally. Sometimes it's easier to have the iron stationary and to move the wire.
You guys have a good weekend?
Yep. I'm going to add just a little bit of extra solder inside. And now that it's molten, I'm going to remove it and let it cool. Now that's cool. You've got a nice solid soldered connection.